Good morning. Before we start, I just want to say thanks to Jigger and the LPO team for having us, the whole DOE family, if you will. And I have to correct one thing about my bio, and that is that in this job, we actually span DOE and DOT. So this is the first, in the history of the federal government, the first joint office that crosses two agencies. And I think that's significant to tell you about because as we have this conversation today, we're really talking about breaking down the silos between transportation and energy. And what I love about what Jigger and his team have put together with this conference is it is about public-private partnership, it's low ego, it's pragmatic, and it's about, I think, skating to where the puck is going versus just where it is today. And that's what we have to do if we're going to decarbonize. So I'm supposed to set the stage on EVs and charging before we enter into a discussion. We are seeing that we have hit the tipping point. When you hit like 5 to 7%, you start to hit a tipping point, and you know that the market forces have taken over. And we've seen a tripling of EV sales from 20 to 22. We've got some counties I was reading yesterday in California that are seeing 30% EV sales. Our office is responsible for almost $20 billion in funding and providing technical support and so forth. $7.5 billion is EV charging, and the rest is school buses with EPA, and then low-no transit buses with FTA. So it's not just about cars, it's not just about driving electric, it's also about riding electric. And we're expecting that $7.5 billion will multiplex about $24 billion in private investment by 2030. That's where you all, many of you, come in. So I think one of the things we're going to talk about today, we've got Patrick from Tesla and Ritu from Zoom, and this is something I've been hearing since I started a year ago, is like, how are we going to deal with the EV pressure on the grid? It was interesting reading about Norway. They thought that the grid was going to disintegrate. It didn't. Nothing happened. And how do we think about EVs, particularly large battery EVs that have the use case of school buses, but also single occupancy vehicles and cars? How do we think about them as actually the solution with managed charging and bidirectional charging? Okay, so that's me setting the stage. Obviously, there's opportunities and challenges for the grid. I will admit I'm more of a transportation person than an energy person, so I'm going to be leaning on you all. But can you talk, I guess, a little bit, both of you, about how your organizations are approaching integrating vehicle-to-grid opportunities, and then how do you communicate the value proposition to customers? And I'll start with you, Patrick.
And thank you for the opportunity to join you today. So we try to approach it by reducing complexity. The more complexity you add, the more challenging it is to manage, to scale, and for customers to understand. So if most Americans go to their utility website when they want to check their bill or there's an outage, and they're typically unhappy about both of those things. And we've got to figure out ways to show the value proposition and make sure that you're not compromising by going electric. So we try to take that approach when it comes to virtual power plants and access to EV charging. So what we try to do, the average driver uses about 12 kilowatt hours a day in their car. So there's a bigger battery than that. So there's a lot of opportunity and diversity of when they can charge, or when the opportunity to charge. And their cars are typically sitting idle 23 hours a day, 22 hours a day. So there's a great opportunity to optimize that charging behavior for the best off-peak times, low carbon times. And we try to provide that information to customers in a very digestible way, reduce the complexity, put it in an app, and let them see what their behavior means from a bill savings perspective. So we launched a program in Texas where customers in the app can enroll in Tesla Electric, a retail offer, And on that, it will say, do you want $25 a month in unlimited charging? And you can enroll very easily. And we will automatically schedule the charge to happen during overnight off-peak times. So it's something that we're trying to make it very digestible, very easy for customers to understand, because if it gets too complex, they're going to say, this is too much, I don't want anything to do with this, I am not ready for this. So there's a lot of opportunities with EVs because of that diversity in the charging profile, as well as the ability of apps to make this information much more readily available and easy to digest.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, because it's so important to look through the eyes of the consumer. In your case, you're looking at the consumer. In your case, you're looking at school districts and so forth. We're trying to do that at the joint office. We stood up ChargeX, a consortium to work with industry, including Tesla, to figure out how do we make the system more reliable and usable for the consumer, so that they actually have a great experience instead of a subpar experience. But Ritu, over to you. Same question. How are you approaching this?
It'll be good for me to give a little bit of context, since everybody has driven car, but hardly anybody has driven school bus. But I'm sure all of you have ridden. Can I just get a hand on if you took a school bus when you were in the, it looks like every single person. So interesting thing about school buses are they are pretty much today the same they were 80 years back. Nothing much has changed. Highly antiquated, very little technology has touched that area, and 90% plus of school buses are still ICE buses. There's very little electrification that has happened in that area. On the flip side of it, you will be surprised to know that it's the largest mass transit system in the US. With 27 million kids traveling twice daily on that yellow school bus network. The second largest mass transit system, airlines, even in the peak time, only 9 million people travel. So that's the kind of difference that people don't realize. The third aspect of it is that there are 500,000 school buses on the road, and as I mentioned, less than 10% of them are electrified. And it's the ideal asset to be electrified. The reason is it's the largest battery on wheels, equivalent to 4 to 8 Tesla batteries together. It has a very predictable commute hours in the day, and it's not used in the peak demand of energy. So it's completely available in the evenings, in the summer, when there's a peak demand for energy. So given that perspective, it's an ideal asset for electrification. But the challenges are that though everybody wants to electrify, where is the path? How do we do it? And the first step to that is optimizing the entire system and making sure it's ready for electrification. And second is the establishing of the entire ecosystem, right from the manufacturers to the charging infrastructure, to working with the utilities to establish the aggregation around it, and then doing the V2G piece of it. And from our perspective, we are making it very easy for the districts and be that one-stop provider in making the electrification happen for the districts.
That's great. So you mentioned utilities. You talk to some people, utilities are like on board, they're excited, they're fully ready. You talk to others, it feels like there's a lag in the utility sector. Then you have the regulatory side. How are you working with utilities to unlock the full benefits of an EV modernized grid?
The excitement is widely there. So we are based in Silicon Valley, and we are closely working in Northern California with PG&E there. And the excitement is obviously there at the top level when you go around it, because everybody knows that 50% of the vehicles by 2030 are expected to be EVs, and grid is not ready for it. They're investing huge amount of fixed infrastructure to produce peaker plants, which are highly polluting, usually in the lower income districts. So the concept of it is something that utilities are super excited about, but rest of the challenges that are there in terms of getting the tariffs clarified and the aggregation that needs to happen, all of those challenges are the one that we are working with the utilities to resolve.
And PG&E seems to be pretty forward thinking on this. I met with the CEO, and she was like, look, if we can avoid big capital expenditures and use these fixed battery or mobile resources and the fixed batteries in the vehicles, we could avoid billions and billions of dollars. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a great question. So what we're doing is, one, we need to make sure there's more EVs out there to maximize the value of the EVs. So we are working with utilities on grid planning, trying to move faster, making sure that they understand where sales are going, where our charging stations are going to be located. But we also have energy storage products and solar products. So working with utilities to try to get ahead of this exponential growth curve. It's really hard to build utility infrastructure at an exponential rate, but I hope we can try, and I hope we can achieve that. But so getting them to move a little bit faster earlier, because there's a lot of no regrets investments in grid infrastructure that we know are going to be necessary. So additional capacity along highways where people are going to be driving, in industrial areas or areas where fleets are located where they're going to electrify. So we've been trying to work with utilities a lot on process. So there's a lot that can be done just from a process perspective and better coordination. I'll give you an example. We wanted to build a megapack factory or large industrial scale product in a factory, and we wanted to do it in less than a year. And the utility PG&E said, we can get that for you in 3 to 5 years. We did it in 12 months. So we renovated a JCPenney warehouse and worked with PG&E to get power there in 12 months. So there's a lot that we can do together just through better coordination and just getting scrappy, coming up with new ideas to get infrastructure built. So we've got lots of examples, and we're trying to work with the utility industry, EEI, and others to disseminate some of these best practices and realize and understand that what has worked in the past is not going to work going forward, so we need to change our processes together.
And I'm guessing part of that is also setting audacious goals and aligning incentives and outcomes, right?
Exactly.
And figuring out how to work together, building trust, essentially, with whether it's PG&E or the federal government or between companies. And that's something I think that often gets overlooked. So Ritu, what do you see, or where do you see technologies being most readily deployable for utilizing EVs as virtual power plants in your industry?
From our perspective, as I mentioned, school buses are the ideal assets because of predictable commute, availability during the peak hours, and also they're mobile. They can be the mobile resiliency center in case of an emergency, in case of flooding happens, or for whatever reason, if there's a power outage. And just to give you an example, our goal is to connect 10,000 electric vehicles, and that is equivalent of 1 gigawatt flex power capacity available back to the grid. So that's the kind of impact the school EVs can have on the grid for us.
And then for you, I would add, because inquiring minds want to know, what are your near-term and long-term outlooks at Tesla?
Yeah, so we want to, there's a lot that we can do just at an easy, you said kind of low-hanging fruit. We're just aligning the incentives on price. And you send the right price signal, and we can work with customers to understand when's the best time to charge. And then aligning incentives to understand with what we're looking to do with our virtual power plants and distributed products at homes is work together with utilities so that this is not the distributed grid versus the central grid. 7 or 8 years ago, there was concerns about the utility death spiral. Now we are just trying to figure out how can we build a double-digit, to support double-digit load growth. And that's going to take a lot of coordination between the central grid and the distributed grid. And as we get more solar and EVs deployed in people's homes and dispatchable, controllable devices, there's less compromise for customers, where customers there's more devices that you can control and reduce load so that customers don't even know what's happening. And that's where we want to go, where customers really don't need to think, and that when they open up their bill, they're not upset. They're actually excited and delighted that they might be saving a couple $100 because they're providing value to their neighbors and the broader grid.
Even with my Tesla, I'm impressed that when I plug it in, I can plug it in at 4 in the afternoon, but it's going to wait because it knows it's going to wait till 6, 7 o'clock to start charging to get to the off-peak rate, which is great. It's simple things sometimes. So we talked a little bit on our prep call about making things as seamless and frictionless as possible, which is a common topic. The federal government plays a role. Sometimes it's like an ATM role, right? Handing out money. Sometimes it's a policy role. Sometimes it's a convening role, and that's a lot of what we do. But how do you think the federal government can make the integration of EVs as VPPs as easy and as excellent a customer experience as possible? And what do you think needs to be standardized in order to see wide-scale deployment? And I'm actually listening as your customer, sort of, right? So
it's a great question. It's like, so the federal, a lot of this is happening at a local level with states and local governments, and I think they need some help too, and that's where the federal government can help, and John talked about permitting. It's not just federal permitting reform. There's a lot of growth happening in this country, not just on EVs or electrification, but just in general, and providing support to local governments to modernize permitting systems. There we go. Solar app. Someone's a solar app fan. So there's a lot that the federal government can do there, and I think it's convening and aligning on the direction, and I think FERC Order 2222, FERC Order 2023, these are great overarching, this is where we want to go. Now, how do we do that at the local level and state level? And that's providing the information, and I think not prescribing how we get there, but just saying this is where we want to go and provide enough flexibility so that we can try new things and innovate on technologies and make sure it's a really good customer experience. So I think it's breaking down those barriers and hurdles and helping modernize systems so we can deploy faster.
Okay. And for you, Ritu?
From our perspective, we really want to do deployment at scale. And one of the constraints there is the price of school bus EVs. It's still 2 or 3 times pricier than ICE. So in the end, like when the convenience comes, people would end up making the wrong choice. Easing the V2G and VPP is one of the ways to decrease the price of the school bus. So from our perspective, the challenge that we are facing is incentivizing and having the right tariff structure. There's so much difference when you go from state to state, and even there, the prices are not published here. So we do believe that the regulation can somehow guide that process in a way that everybody has to publish the prices, or because from our perspective, there is no way grid can upgrade to a scale where it can support the EVs, the adoption of the EVs and the pace of the EV adoption that's happening. V2G is it's going to happen. It is not something, research discussion. So awareness around it and steering the policies around it would really help.
Okay,
the process.
great. Well, all right, speed round. They cut 5 minutes off because John Podesta talked a little longer. No, I'm just kidding. There's no press here. What does Zoom look like in 10 years? 30 seconds.
Our dream is all 27 million kids drive EV clean buses.
Okay, great. That was really, really concise. That was great.
10 times bigger with a 2 to 3 times bigger grid.
2 to 3 times bigger grid. Fixed asset grid, or?
We need all of the above. We're going to need fixed assets, but it's really about maximizing the utilization of that infrastructure, and that's where customer-sided devices can help manage that and optimize.
Great. Okay. So we've got like a minute left. I'll just say in closing, I feel like John McLaughlin. But in closing, I mean, this has been a great conversation. We could talk for hours. Our prep call was amazing. I learned a lot from it. I think that my take over the last year in this role is that this is really about change management. And that's why, again, conferences like this are so important, because particularly after COVID, we're forcing people to get in a room and have conversations and talk, and you can't underestimate the importance of that. I also think that we need, and I wrote a book about this, we need more socially responsible companies. And we need more government thinking like the private sector, but with different outcomes and stakeholders, right? And so with that, I'll just say that we in our roles, and it's so great that we have people, that they allow people like Jigger and I to run around the federal government, because we're here to serve all of you. You know, I think sometimes people think, oh, it's the federal government, they're sitting on high and they're here to like pass judgment and standards and rules. And like we put out the 97% uptime minimum standard, but we know the private sector can do it, but we also put charge X in place to work with industry to get industry there. And so I do hope that people leave this session and this conference with an understanding that we are here to work with you, for you in some cases, and not against you or not sit on high and pass judgment. And that goes for you too as well. So thanks so much for having us. I hope you guys have enjoyed this as well.